to show you guys in the audience, but I'm going to let Joe get on out of here because it is his birthday.
I'll
and I want you
stay.
to
I'll
go.
stay.
And
No, I'll stay to the end. And I want to. If you do thank yous and stuff. Do you,
yeah, yeah. So
I'll,
we got a couple of things in here. So I just wanted to share with you guys one last thing, and we're going to go back to the beginning. In response to President Trump's post yesterday morning, where he was talking about big pharma, Pfizer needs to give us the data. Dr. David Martin responded, and he asked us to share this. And I think this is important information, and I want to share it with you guys. So I'm going to share this real fast. Let me see. Here it is. And I'm not as fast with this as you guys are. So I'm still a baby at this. Here we go. You guys ready?
Good afternoon. It is September 1st, the return, if you will, of Butterfly of the Week for a special short episode. It's the afternoon of the 1st, and as many of you know, today President Trump had a tweet that was an extremely interesting development in the ongoing saga of what's been going on over the last 5 years. And for those of you not familiar with it, the tweet was very simple. He said, "It's very important that drug companies justify the success of their various COVID drugs. Many people think they are a miracle that saved millions of lives. Others disagree." And he goes into the details, ending with a request that the drug companies show the public the success that they have reportedly showed him. And I thought it would be very helpful to point out a couple things just so that we all have the same data, because President Trump in his tweet suggested that there's a possibility that the miracle of Operation Warp Speed potentially was not what it was cracked up to be. And I wanted to just give a very, very quick overview of a couple points that we should address. First of all, the data he requested is not going to come from Pfizer or from Moderna. The data that he needs to see is the data that actually comes from public records that have been repeatedly shown on this platform for the last 5 years plus. First of all, the first data they need to know was that SARS was a direct result of gain-of-function research from UNC Chapel Hill's work on WIV1. That's the Wuhan Institute of Virology viral model number 1, which was a sample provided to University of North Carolina Chapel Hill, Ralph Barrick's lab, under an authorized grant by Anthony Fauci's NIAID. And that sample was transferred in 2014 during the gain-of-function moratorium. There is no question that in 2015, when the paper was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that the world was put on notice that the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus pathogen bioweapon model was poised for human existence, because that's exactly what they said. It's important for President Trump to know that on October 2014, Anthony Fauci's NIAID violated the law and authorized the gain-of-function research on the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus to move forward at UNC Chapel Hill, while the head fake was to suggest that EcoHealth Alliance was doing it in Wuhan. The fact of the matter is, and is evidenced by the statements in the paper, that the gain-of-function research created the biological weapon that became what we now refer to as SARS-CoV-2. And that was published in 2016. They knew that the ingredients that they were putting in the shots were either deadly or debilitating. Let's start with the deadly. They knew that pseudouridine, as early as 2017, was shown to be the agent that would unleash what we now refer to as turbocancers. And they knew it was going to be highly problematic, so much so that in 2017, they published a study there that laid out the risks of pseudouridine and what it could do, both in cancer promotion and in the progression of other horrific diseases. They knew that the spike protein was in fact going to target the human heart. This data was very evident since 2002, when Ralph Barrick was publishing the research showing that he could get the spike protein to trigger cardiomyopathy and other forms of heart inflammation. But the publications that I have here show that by 2009, they knew that the spike protein, the thing that the shot was instructing your body to make, they knew that was going to create heart problems and potentially long-term other disease problems. And then let's get to the last one, which is very fascinating. The last piece of evidence we have here, which actually came out of molecular therapy, not only showed that the lipid nanoparticle created enormous numbers of adverse events, as much as 62% of adverse events in animal models. And this is the lipid nanoparticle used to deliver the agent of the shot. But this was not just a generic knowledge. The individual highlighted in red on this slide happens to be the individual who was the chief medical officer for none other than Moderna, who knew that there was an unacceptable high level of adverse events associated with the lipid nanoparticle. And this information was known and published years before there was any SARS-CoV-2 conversations in China. They knew that the shot was deadly and debilitating, and they made it anyhow. Now, how did they know that it was deadly? Well, let's look at their own words. Let's not try to infer from anything. On September 18th, 2019, one day before President Trump signed the executive order, which was the forerunner to what became what we call Operation Warp Speed, when he signed the executive order on September 19th, 2019, having been instructed to do so by Alex Azar, then the director of the Department of Health and Human Services. They stated at the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the World Health Organization that there was going to be a quickly spreading lethal respiratory pathogen that was going to be unleashed for the purpose of creating the reason that the public would accept a universal vaccine by September 2020. Let's review the dates again. The World Health Organization said that in a publication, The World at Risk, on September 18th, 2019, that there would be a lethal respiratory pathogen released. They said that the progress indicators of the success of the World Health Organization would be in September 2020. There would be a uniform vaccine program rolled out worldwide. And the day after that publication, on September 19th, 2019, President Trump signed the executive order which authorized the rapid development of a universal or pan-influenza vaccine program, including the use of DNA and other genetically modified products. So all of this was done well in advance of patient number one. They also knew that the clinical trial, as they configured it, was deceptive and would lead to an outcome that would be misleading. And this is where President Trump needs to have very clear insight. None of the data that was required by the FDA's own publication, which I have here for reference, so anybody can look it up, the FDA stipulated in 2018 that there must be data submitted prior to a clinical trial that talked about things like the immune response, all kinds of clinical outcomes, and specifically laid out the requirements for what vaccine clinical trials must include, none of which were included in what was done for the COVID shots. They changed the definition of what vaccination was, and then what they did was they cunningly used this 2-week period of time between shot 1 and shot 2, so that all of the adverse events that took place in the clinical trial were front-loaded into the immediately after shot 1 population, which was officially classified as unvaccinated even though they received the shot. What that did was it shifted the adverse events so that the public was deceived into believing that there weren't many adverse events, but the reason why was because to be considered vaccinated in the clinical trial, you had to have 2, not 1 shot. And a huge number of patients, after receiving the first shot, had immediate death or immediate disability. All of those were considered to be either COVID-related illnesses and deaths, or, and in every case, they were all considered to be, quote, unvaccinated. And this is where President Trump needs to understand that the clinical trials sponsored by Moderna and by Pfizer, to a lesser degree J&J, were set up for deceptive medical practices. This was meant to deceive the president. It was meant to deceive the public, and it was architected so that the adverse events would absolutely be loaded onto what was called the unvaccinated population. This was known, clear, and compelling deception. And remember, they said why they were doing it. They said they were doing it because they needed to, quote, sustain the funding base beyond the crisis. They needed to increase the public understanding of the need for medical countermeasures such as pan-coronavirus vaccines. And then they said a key driver is the media, and the economics will follow the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will respond if they see profit at the end of the process. Mr. President, this was always about the profiteering of the stated financial interests of all of the parties involved, and it never was a public health emergency. It was a horrific coup d'etat to disrupt this country and countries around the world, to destabilize democracies in the name of financial and social gain.